last time we went, I think, through verse 11.
That's correct.
And okay. And so today let me just review that a little bit, then we'll come to verse 12. So this is where Paul was in Athens, remember in chapter 17, and he spoke there to the intellectuals and everything, and he had some impact, but not a big impact, because probably the mindset of the people, they weren't that interested in what he was doing there. So he moved on, he went down south, farther south to Corinth, and he came there with fear and trembling because he had been beaten up, stoned, arrested, had gone through so many things at every city he'd come to, and he went down to this city, which was real wicked. It's known for being wicked. It's totally like immoral. You know, they had a temple of Aphrodite with 1,000 prostitutes there. They had all these sailors that came there. You know what sailors are known for doing, like prostitutes and all that. And so, and they had all these idols and different, gods and goddesses and so forth. But he went on down there in fear and trembling, and he met this couple named Priscilla and Aquila, and they were Jews who were kicked out of Rome when the Emperor Claudius just said all the Jews need to go. And he kicked the Jews out, and he kicked them out in 49 AD. So that means this had to be sometime shortly after that they were kicked out. And they were tent makers or leather workers. And so therefore, Paul could work with them. See, unlike me, he had this career he could follow, he could do anywhere he went. He could practice his work anywhere he went. And that way he'd make a living until he would get support from the churches and so forth. And by the way, that's another thing people don't understand about missions. They used to say to me, how come you don't just work in the countries you go to? And, can't you just get a job in Mexico or get a job in Russia or whatever? What they don't understand, people like that, is Paul did this because this was all one government, Rome, the Roman Empire. So you were just going to different parts of the same empire with the same laws. And plus, they didn't have near as much regulation and law back then as we do today. So if you made tents in Turkey, you could go over to Greece and make tents. You could go over to Rome and make tents. You can make your tents wherever. Just start making some connections. Buy the materials, start making the tents. And you're allowed to do that. But today, if you go to Mexico, I can't work in Mexico and get paid in Mexico. They have laws, same as we do. Every country except us, we're real stupid about that. We let illegals come in and take the jobs. Most countries say, look, you have to be a citizen here because we're protecting our people. Only citizens can work here. And you can work if you get a visa for work or whatever. If we need you, like if you're a computer guy or a nurse or whatever, something that we need, we'll let you get a visa and come work here. Okay, so that's one thing. There's regulations and barriers to working in different countries. But second, most countries you go to as a missionary, not all, like Europe and all, it's different, but most countries that you go to as a missionary, they're third world. You can work all right, but you'll work all day for $5. So if you're going to work all day for $5 or $10, wouldn't it just be smarter to stay home and make a decent salary here in this country and send money to a missionary? That way he lives off of the money that you send, and he doesn't have to spend all day working at some, low-level job that he can't do the ministry that he wants to do, that he's supposed to do, right? So that's the other thing people don't understand. Missionaries can't always go make tents like this because it wouldn't be worth your time. You'd spend all your time doing some menial thing. You wouldn't even be able to teach people the Bible or anything like that. And so, but during these times and in this empire, Paul could do that. So he evangelized there, and then Silas and Timothy came to him. They had been up in Philippi, but they came on down. And when they came, the Bible says, I got the verses here, I can tell you later if you want, but when they came, they brought an offering. The church of Philippi was one of the first churches to ever say, we'll support the missionary. And, Paul taught this everywhere. He taught churches, part of your duty as Christians is to give to missions. And so they sent an offering to him. And once he got that offering, he could quit doing tent making and dedicate himself fully to the preaching and so forth. But he worked in the synagogue in Corinth until the point where the people got mad, and some of the Jews accepted what he had to say, and others were really mad, and they said, they just blasphemed God, and they argued with him. They got real nasty with him, and he said, you know what, your blood's on your own heads. I'm out of here. I'm going next door. And so he went next door and worked with people over there, but But he actually won this guy named Crispus, who was the head of the synagogue. He won him to the Lord. And so he actually took the leader of the synagogue with him and won him to the Lord. And a lot of other Jews and non-Jews, they went over there with him to the home of this guy named Titius Justus. And we saw that last time. And many people believe his full name was Gaius Titius Justus. And if that's so, he's kind of a well-to-do guy who opened up his house. And that's where they had the church, in the house. Because back then you didn't have church buildings. So they met in his house. And Paul wrote the letter to Romans later from his house. And he says, I'm here at the home of Gaius, when he wrote the letter to Romans. And so we think that's who he was. So now we come to verse 12. While Gallio was proconsul of Achaia, the Jews made a united attack on Paul. Oh, by the way, I forgot to say, so Jesus appeared to Paul while he was there and told him, don't be afraid. I have a lot of people in this city. Nobody's going to attack and harm you. So he encouraged him. Well, then right after that, we read this. While Gallio was proconsul of Achaia, the Jews made a united attack on Paul and brought him into court. This man, they charged, is persuading the people to worship God in ways contrary to the law. So, here they drag him into court. And the Lord had appeared to him and told him nobody's going to hurt you here. But then right after that, apparently pretty soon after that, they raised up a lot of trouble and they drug him to court. So can you imagine? I mean, like there's all these angry Jews and they take you to court. The guy's just trying to tell them the good news about the Messiah and they don't want it. And they're going to try to get him shut down. And so just as Paul was about to speak, Gallio said to the Jews, if you Jews were making a complaint about some misdemeanor or serious crime, it would be reasonable for me to listen to you. But since it involves questions about words and names in your own law, settle the matter yourselves. I won't be judge of any such things. And so he had them ejected from the court. And he kicked them out. Years ago, I was charged with stealing a dog because this dog came to our land and was eating our dog's food and everything. We didn't know where it came from. So we called the pound. And so it turned out a neighbor who lived a ways away, it was his dog. And he came and accused me of stealing it and took me to court. And I was just a kid. But for some reason, I had signed the dog catcher's thing or whatever. So he charged me. And so my parents had to get a lawyer and everything. And the judge, when he heard the case.
This is in Texas?
This was in Orlando. When he heard the case, he said, this is a ridiculous case. Get out of my courtroom. And he dismissed it just right away. He said, ridiculous. Get out. Because we had a lawyer, and the lawyer said, Your Honor, the young man just called the dog catcher because they didn't know who the dog belonged to. They didn't steal the dog. And then he says, what about you? Do you have representation? And the guy who was accusing me said, no, sir, I represent myself. He said, well, you've made a big mistake there. Just get out. This is a ridiculous course. And he took a bottle of pills and he took some pills and he made us get out. So that's what Gallio was like.
Took the pills?
Yeah, he took some pills. I don't know. Maybe he had a heart condition. Yeah. So anyway, he says, look, I'm not going to be a judge of this. Get out. So then it says, verse 17, they all turned on Sosthenes, the synagogue ruler, and beat him in front of the court. But Gallio showed no concern whatever. So back then it was pretty wild and rough and rowdy, and they just beat this guy up right in front of the court, and Gallio didn't do anything. And you notice the guy is named Sosthenes, and he's the synagogue ruler. Well, we just read that Paul won Crispus, the synagogue ruler, to the Lord. So people think what this means is that this guy took over. So Paul won the guy Crispus, and he went next door to the house of Gaius, and he was teaching the Bible there, teaching about Jesus there. And so the Jews replaced the guy they had as the leader, Crispus, with this guy named Sosthenes. But there's in 1 Corinthians, Paul mentions a guy named Sosthenes. And so it seems like Sosthenes eventually came around to being a Messianic Jew too. And maybe the Jews knew that and they beat him. Or we don't know. The way it's written, we don't know if the Jews beat this guy up or if Greeks beat this guy up. They just don't. It's just not clear. But when the judge kicked them all out, they were so angry. And we don't know who, like I say, maybe it was the Jews. They're so angry they charged Paul and nothing happened. And so now they're mad and they beat up the synagogue ruler. You messed us up. We didn't get a good case. We lost the case because of you fool. And they just beat him up. Or maybe it was Greeks who said, you Jews, you're always causing trouble. And just jumped on and started beating him up. We don't know, but it wasn't fun. They beat him up. And the Roman guy, Gallio, could care less. I don't care what you people do. Get out of my sight. Now, here's the thing. This is important because this guy, Gallio, in the end of the 1800s, early 1900s, they actually found a pavement thing with mosaic in it, a building, an archaeological find in Delphi, Greece, and it has his name written there. And we know actually the date. We know who he was and we know when he served. He served from 51 to 53 AD. That's when he was there. So that locates for us when Paul was there. Because he was there when this guy was proconsul. And it says proconsul in Greek. And that's accurate because Corinth used to be Greek. And then it was destroyed in 146 BC. And then Julius Caesar had it refounded in 44 BC as a Roman colony, and it eventually became a Roman province. So it was Greece, but it became a Roman province, so they had a proconsul. That's what you called the governor when it was a Roman province. And so it's a technical term, proconsul, and it's accurate because we know they really were a province. And we know the date because we really know there was this guy named Gallio. They even found this inscription saying his name, that he was proconsul. And we know about him, if you read about him, he was actually related to the famous Roman poet Seneca. And his dad was a Spanish orator. And of course, Spanish, it's not like Spanish today, but it was Roman, But the Roman province of Spain, España, he was an orator there. He was famous. And so this Gallio was a nobleman. His dad was important. He was a brother of this famous writer and all, the Roman Stoic philosopher Seneca, who also was personal tutor to Nero, who became emperor later after this. So we know who this guy was. And we just started off the chapter reading about how Claudius, the emperor, kicked the Jews out of Rome. And we know that from the writings of like Suetonius. He said Claudius kicked them out in 49 AD. And so we know it was because of the riots between the Jews and the Messianic Jews and the non-Messianics. It seems like that was one of the main things. We talked about that last time. And so anyway, what I'm saying is, you see, the Bible is very accurate. It's very accurate. There's a guy named Sir William Ramsay in the 19th century. He was kind of a liberal believer. He believed in the Lord and everything, but he's kind of liberal. And he kind of thought the Bible, a lot of people like this today. They think the Bible is like, it teaches you spiritual truths and all, but you can't take it literally. Like the Catholics, for the most part, will tell you the book of Genesis, the story of Adam and Eve, you don't take that literally. That's just a story where the main point is what God wants you to get. He created us. And there's not really an Adam and Eve. There wasn't really a serpent or anything like that. So this guy was like that, William Ramsay. So he set out to go around the Roman world and do archaeological digs and everything to prove that the Bible is not really literally true. And he became a real fundamentalist Christian because of his studies. Because he found, I can't remember, I don't have it written here, but I think 50 some different places mentioned in the book of Acts, just exactly like Paul said, or Luke said, Luke wrote Acts, and different cities, and even things like the depth of the water off Malta and the currents and the winds and things like that, and what you called the guy, like you called him a proconsul. And that in Acts 17, they called Paul a seed picker. What does this babbler say? Well, the Greek word is seed picker. And that was a word that if you were, it's like slang. We know what gay means today. Today, gay doesn't mean you're happy. It used to. And if we say AIDS, depends on the context, but when we talk about AIDS, we're not talking about people that help you. We're talking about a disease. But that's for this time. If you went back to the 1940s, gay meant you're happy. And we all had a gay time, a gay old time or whatever, Well, so if there are writings or something, the TV, videos or whatever in the future, and they look back and people are saying gay and it means you're happy, then it had to be way before, like, I don't know what, the 70s or whenever gay became what it is today. It's just like that in the Bible. They use these certain words, and that's exactly the words they used at that time in that region of the world. So this just is another little detail that shows you that the Bible is accurate and trustworthy. It's a real story. And so anyway, but the story here is they stirred up this trouble against Paul, but Jesus had told him nobody's going to harm you. And so he's in front of Gallio, and these people complain about him, and he starts to speak. And Gallio just says, I don't even need to hear anything from you. This is stupid. I'm not getting involved in theological arguments among Jews. Get out of my courtroom. You know, you Jews, you're always arguing. It's like you're arguing about how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. I don't want to hear it. I'm here for the government. I'm here to stop crime and stuff like that. I'm not going to listen to this kind of thing. Get out of here. So that's good. He recognized what government should be for. Government shouldn't meddle with the church, and we don't care, we don't care if you believe once you're saved, you're always saved, or, if you believe you should speak in tongues or anything like that. You church people do that, whatever. You argue about that all you want. But now, if you steal from somebody in that other church or you hurt somebody, we'll intervene. But we don't mess with things that are just, theological. And so they kicked him out. And so then they beat up this Sosthenes. And as I say, Paul mentions a Sosthenes in 1 Corinthians 1:1. And so it seems like this Sosthenes that got beat up, he might have gotten beat up because he was sort of pro-Paul. And so they vented their anger and stuff by beating him up. And maybe he's the guy who became a Christian later on, And by the way, it's also interesting that when they came before Gallio, the place where he held court is called the Bema. That's what the Greek word is. When he sits as the judge, it's called the Bema seat. And so that's a prominent place. That's where a court is. You go there. And that's the word that we see in the other places like 2 Corinthians 5:10, where it says we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, the Bema seat of Christ. That's what it says. So the Lord will sit as the judge and he will judge us, So now let's look at verse 18. Okay. Paul stayed on in Corinth for some time, and then he left the brothers, and that always means brothers and sisters. And so he left the Christians there, and he sailed for Syria, accompanied by Priscilla and Aquila. So now the woman's name is put first. Usually the name that's put first is the more prominent person. So it switches the name order there, just like at first it's Barnabas and Saul, and then it becomes Paul and Barnabas, because Paul became more prominent. This is Priscilla and Aquila. She was a woman, and she was apparently kind of more a spiritual leader than her husband. But anyway, he sailed for Syria. So remember, this is Greece, and he's going to sail east toward Syria. Before he sailed, he had his hair cut off at Cenchrea because of a vow he had taken. Remember, Corinth is on this narrow strip of land between the upper part of Greece and the lower, the Peloponnesian Peninsula. So it's this strip of land, and on one side, it kind of goes north-south, really. And on one side is the port called Cenchrea. It faces east. And on the other side is the port called Lachaeum, I think is how you say it. And so what they do is ships would come in here and then unload all the cargo across to this side, and then put them on another ship and go that way. So if you want to go toward Italy, you go from Lachaeum. If you want to go toward the east, you go from Cenchrea, but that's the port. So it's just close to Corinth there. He just went over there and got on a ship to sail over to Syria. And he had his hair cut off. And apparently he took a vow, and what says that he took a vow, and we don't know what vow that was, but the Nazarites used to let their hair grow. Remember, Samson had to let his hair grow. That's a vow that you could take in Judaism. If you wanted to kind of consecrate yourself to God, you let your hair grow and stuff like that. And then when your time is up of your vow, like you vow for 30 days or whatever, then you cut your hair off, you shave it as a sign of like, my vow is over. And I thank God, for being with me during this time, or for giving me something I was praying for. That's why I took the vow. Or sometimes they said they took these vows like to give thanks to God. So some say maybe he took this vow because God protected him there in Corinth, and a lot of people came to Christ, and now there's a church there, and so he He let his hair grow while he's serving God there, and then he had it all shaved off just to give thanks to God. But it was a kind of a Jewish ritual that they would do a lot. They would shave their heads. And you'll see this later in Acts, I think it's 26 or whatever. Paul pays for some guys who go to the temple and have their heads shaved. So it's a Jewish thing, it's Jewish custom. So even though he is the apostle to the Gentiles, he still was a Jew, and he did Jewish things. He followed their customs and so forth, and he didn't eat pork and all like that. He, for the most part, when he's with just Gentiles, he would, to show them that you could do that now. But when he didn't offend the Jews, he didn't eat ham sandwiches with Jews. So he was still Jewish. And so they sail over from Greece to Ephesus, which is Turkey. That's not that far. You just go right across the Aegean Sea there, and you're at Ephesus. And that's a major city. And then Paul left Priscilla and Aquila. He ended up leaving them at Ephesus. And we'll see that again. But he went into the synagogue in Ephesus, and he reasoned with the Jews. That's that word dialegomai. So a dialogue. He dialogued with them. He reasoned with them. He argued with people. He tried to persuade them. He presented the gospel and then the prophecies about Messiah, and then he would debate with them and stuff. That's what he did. He went in the synagogue and reasoned with them. And they really liked it, apparently, because verse 20, they asked him to spend more time with them. But he declined. So he said, I can't right now. But as he left, he promised, I will come back if it's God's will. Then he set sail from Ephesus. All right, now, I don't think I see it here, but anyway, the reason he declined was he had already made up his mind he wanted to get back to Jerusalem before Passover. And so that's why even though they wanted him to stay, usually he'd stay if people wanted him to. But he said, no, I can't. I got to go. And so as he left, he said, I'll come back if it's God's will. And he set sail from Ephesus. When he landed at Caesarea, he went up and greeted the church and then went down to Antioch. After spending some time in Antioch, Paul set out from there and traveled from place to place throughout the region of Galatia and Phrygia, strengthening all the disciples. So he sails over to Turkey. Remember, back then you're sailing and rowing. So you don't just steam along against the wind or whatever because you got a motor. So it's hard. And, I've been over there. It's real pretty. The Greek islands and everything. In Turkey, it's just all rocky.
Like the Greek islands?
Well, yeah, and then he went to Turkey. But it all looks the same over there. It's white rocks, and it's real pretty, real pretty. Blue.
Have you been there?
Yeah, blue. In the Navy. I was in the Navy. Mediterranean, real pretty, and the towns and all along there. So you sail along short distances from here to here, and then from here to here, and then here to here, like that, usually, because you're rowing and sailing. So he goes over from Ephesus. He goes into the synagogue. He reasons with them, and that's good. And this is his first time in Ephesus. But then he goes over to Caesarea, which I've been over there too, and that's real beautiful. That's on the coast. Herod made a port. That's one of the first places they ever made artificial concrete. Like they poured concrete in the sea. The Romans learned how to make concrete in the sea. And they created a port because it's just a beach there. They didn't have a port. And they created a port which lasted for a long time. And it's real pretty there. And
What's it made with? It's
giant, these huge, they call them caissons. You pour the concrete and it makes like a big, huge block. So you make this block and that block and that block and that block. And it makes look like a wall out there that keeps the big waves from crashing in and wrecking your ships. So it'll be calm inside there. Protect them, a port is a place where you're protected from the wind, because you can't, if you're just out on the open beach, you're going to be slammed by storms and stuff. So he built a little wall. He built a big wall, and you can see all the ruins there. We went to Caesarea. They had a chariot racing track there, and an amphitheater, and they had this port. And anyway, Paul went there because that's a port, and then he went up and greeted the church. And so when it says up, it probably means he went to Jerusalem, because that's the coast. And when you go to Jerusalem, it's up, 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 up. You go up through the hills and mountains to get to Jerusalem. So he greeted the church there. Then he went down to Antioch. I would say up because Antioch's north. To me, I go up to Georgia, up to DC or whatever. I go up. But that's not what they're thinking. They're thinking of elevation. So you go down from Jerusalem to Antioch, which is down by the coast, up in Syria. And he goes there. That's where he was launched out as a missionary, remember? So he wanted to go back there. He preached and taught there for years, and they knew him, they loved him, they sent him out there. So that he goes back to Antioch, and he hangs out with them for a while. The big, huge, many hundreds or thousands of Christians there, probably taught, preached, told them what God had been doing with him and everything. And then after a while, he says, I'm going to go out again, and I'm going to go out to these places I've been before and try to strengthen the disciples, because he's started all these churches. So he heads out again. This is his second missionary trip, and he goes out on his own, traveling on foot. And so he had that court trial and everything in front of Gallio, but he didn't get hurt, just like the Lord said, you're not going to be hurt. And he got a church going there, and then it's time for him to go. He wants to go home for a while, back to Israel, and so forth. And he launched and went back there. And then, so this is just the last two verses there. It's really covering a lot of time and a lot of distance. I say about 1,500 miles, because he went all the way, ship and by foot and by walking and mules, maybe a donkey or whatever. But he sailed from Greece to Turkey, and then from Turkey to Jerusalem, to Caesarea on the coast of Israel. Then he went to Jerusalem. Then he went to Antioch in Syria. Then from there he went back up into Turkey on foot. So he went to Ephesus. This was his first time in Ephesus, and I want to read you this quote from
Ephesus is in Greece.
Turkey.
Ephesus is in Turkey.
Ephesus is right on the coast. It's a port too, and it's right there on Turkey. So Greece is over here, and then you just go right across to Turkey, and Ephesus is a big city there.
It would be nice to have slides.
I know. I have maps on here. Do you have any maps in your Bibles, or I don't know?
There was a map in the purple Bible. I can't wait to get that purple Bible back in Virginia.
I can show you real quick, but
No, I mean,
in just
it'd be nice to see.
right. And I have, it is important to see. It helps.
That's okay.
But anyway, I'll show you as soon as I finish the tape. Because I have it here on my laptop. I'll show it to you. But I want to read you something here. Can you see it there on that map? Can you see it?
Which city are we looking for now?
Ephesus. Well, there's Cenchrea, there's Ephesus. But anyway, let me read this to you, and then I'll show you maps, okay? This comes from a study Bible called the Word and Life Study Bible. It says, have you ever longed for your church to be more like the church of the New Testament? It says, if so, carefully study the church at Ephesus. More material in the New Testament pertains historically to Ephesus than to any other community of believers. Did you know that? There's more written about Ephesus than any other New Testament church, giving us the best picture that we have of what a first century congregation looks like. Listen to this. No less than 20 chapters covering a period of more than 40 years describe God's work and his people at Ephesus. More authors write about Ephesus than any other New Testament congregation. Luke described its foundings in 3 chapters, Acts 18 through 20. So that's what we're just reading now. Luke describes the founding of the church at Ephesus in Acts 18 through 20. Then Paul wrote the whole epistle of Ephesians to the congregation there, right? So the 6 chapters of Ephesians, Paul wrote to that church there. And then he also wrote 2 letters, 1st and 2nd Timothy, to Timothy, who was one of the pastors there. Then John brought a message from Christ to the Ephesian believers in a letter that we find in Revelation 2, 1 through 7, the church at Ephesus. So 20 chapters in the Bible talk about Ephesus. And then here's one more little part of the quote. It says, Ephesus was the most important city in Asia Minor. Remember, Asia Minor is Turkey today. It was an important center of trade and commerce, and it had a temple to Artemis, or Diana, which was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. One of the 7 wonders at Ephesus, the temple to Diana, or Artemis. The Greeks called her Artemis, the Romans called her Diana, and we're going to see what happens there in the next chapter. But the church at Ephesus begins right here in Acts 18 with Paul's first visit. And he goes in and he speaks in the synagogue, and people are interested. And they want to learn more. And he says, I'll be back. Just like Arnold Schwarzenegger, you know. I'll be back. If I can. If it's God's will, he says, I'll be back. And so, you know, these people are, they're interested in the Word of God. And you've got Jews there, as always, but you also have proselytes, who are people who, Gentiles who fully converted to Judaism, and then you have God-fearers, which is other Gentiles who are just interested, but they don't want to convert to become Jews, but they like going to the synagogue. So he goes in there and talks with all of them and tells them about the Messiah, that the Messiah has come. And you know, that's what he did, and he got a sort of an interest going there. Then he leaves, and we're going to see in the next chapter, he leaves Priscilla and Aquila there, and they're going to work there and get it going. And he's going to come back there, and he's going to get a church going there, and that's going to become a big group. But at this point, he just stayed a little while, and he wanted to go because he wanted to celebrate Passover in Jerusalem. And this would have been 52 AD. And so in 52 AD, Passover would have been in April. You can't sail before March because it's stormy. So you got to wait till about March 10th, and then Passover's in April. So if he wants to get the Passover, he has to go. That's why he couldn't stay, because it's probably, you know, around March or whatever or maybe it's already April by the time he goes into that synagogue, and he wants to get the Passover, so it's not far off and you have to get going. They sail slowly, you know, it's 2 or 3 knots or whatever, 5 knots. You got to go. So that's why he left. And it's interesting because when he first went out on his earlier missionary journey, they weren't allowed to go there. The Holy Spirit told him not to go. But this period of time, apparently it was okay. So God's timing is like, sometimes God says, I don't want you to do this. You just have this sense that that's not the right timing. I can't do it. And then later there's a time like, now I want you to go there and do this. And so we'll just wrap it up right there for today.